Hey, what's up everyone, it's Justin here, and today I've got the review for you of the Google Nexus 6 made by Motorola. By about this time of year, pretty much every major manufacturer has come up with their flagship smartphone for the year, and all attention shifts towards Google and their newest Android software, which in this year was Android 5.0 Lollipop, as well as the new Nexus devices including the Nexus 6 and the Nexus 9 that were released this year. The design of the Nexus 6 was quite different compared to the Nexus 5, and that is because they switched manufacturers to team up with to build the newest Nexus device, with the Nexus 5 being made by LG and the Nexus 6 being made by Motorola, with its design being much reminiscent of Motorola's own flagship, the Moto X. I have to say, upon the initial announcement of the Nexus 6, I was quite surprised by a few things. Not only does it now have a flagship price, but the fact that the device features a 6-inch display. And that makes this device 6.27 inches tall and 3.27 inches wide. And you really have to see it in person to realize just how big this thing is, which is probably why Google will continue selling the Nexus 5 as well. The device is powered by a Qualcomm Snapdragon 805 processor that is quad-core and clocked in at 2.7 GHz and an Adreno 420 GPU. You've also got 3 gigs of RAM, a 13 megapixel rear-facing camera, a 2 megapixel front-facing camera, and of course it is run by Android 5.0 Lollipop. It also includes a 3220 mAh internal battery and comes in at a 32 or 64 GB storage configuration. On the bottom of the device, of course, you will find your micro USB port, and what you will notice from the form factor is that it isn't the thinnest phone of the market, coming in at 10.1 millimeters thick. However, it doesn't have to be. Sometimes the heft is definitely appreciated, making the device very easy to grip, and in general, Motorola in the past has been known for having their smartphones feeling great in the hand when you're holding them. On the top, you will also find your SIM card slot, as well as your 3.5mm headphone jack located right in the middle. The edge is also made out of metal. And I have to say, speaking of the design in general, the device looks beautiful. I actually am a pretty big fan of the Nexus badge, and there is also the small little lip that goes with the Motorola logo, which people are a pretty big fan of dating back to last year's Moto X. And the way that the device just curves seems to be that it was molded for your hand. On the side, you will also find your volume rockers and your power button located right next to each other, but it is great that they have also made the power button a little bit textured, that way you could tell which one is which. It's just these small details that make a huge difference. On the front, you've got that massive display I was talking about, and it comes in at 5.96 inches with the resolution of 1440 by 2560, so it is a QHD AMOLED display. And this gives you a PPI of 493. I'm going to tell you that although a lot of people do like large displays nowadays, I have to say it is a little bit too big for my taste. I would have preferred something at around 5.5 inches. So I feel that the 6-inch form factor, although many people out there enjoy it, it just isn't for everyone. In terms of the screen quality though, I would have to say it did a pretty good job. The screen actually looks a little bit too saturated though, in my opinion, and you'll notice that the reds, the blues just pop out of the screen. In many cases that is a good thing, like you may see with Samsung displays, but in this case I would say that it is just a little bit too much. The whites could also be just a little bit more sharp, but a lot of these things that I'm talking about can definitely be fixed in a software update like we saw in the OnePlus One, for example. But generally speaking, the display was pretty sharp, and that is what you would expect out of any smartphone nowadays, more notably a QHD display. So now that we have talked about the hardware and the display, it is time to shift focus over to the software, and that is one of the biggest things whenever you're talking about the Nexus devices. Being a Google device, of course the beauty of that is it is first in line to receive all major Android updates. And you are also guaranteed updates for the next 2 years. With Android 5.0 Lollipop, it did bring many visual changes primarily, but there is also some behind the scenes changes I would say being made as well. It is now running on an ART runtime instead of Dalvik, but instead of digging deeper into the details, I kind of want to just use the device and show you what changes you will notice as an everyday consumer running everyday tasks. The first thing you're going to notice is that it is very snappy, and that has pretty much been the case across the board with stock Android. With the new material design update being a principal feature in Android Lollipop, the visual interface looks great, the animations are changed up, the notification tab looks a little bit different. Like I mentioned before, it is in a way what Apple did with iOS 7, just not as dramatic. You also have the option to add multiple users, which is great. And heading over to the settings, you'll see that it has a nice flat look going across the board, which I'm a pretty big fan of in general. A thing you'll also notice on the top right corner is you can also search settings now. That is something that we weren't able to do before. With the battery, you also have a battery saver function, which I'm going to show you more later. And from continuing to navigate through the software, you can tell that Google did focus a lot on the visual appeal of this interface. And in general, everything just looks great, and to me that is very important. Of course, swiping up from your home button, it will take you straight to Google Now, and that is also located on the left side of your home menu. And here is just a look at the cards as well, but I still wish there was a function within stock Android to close all the apps at once. You don't only find the material design in the interface, you will also find it in updated Google apps such as YouTube that has also recently been updated, the calendar and stuff like that, which is great. And what I hope for is that more manufacturers will also catch on like we saw with iOS 7 and kind of match their applications to go with the interface of Android. But from using Android 5.0, I have to say that I like the experience, and that is normally the case when using stock Android. There isn't too much stuff going on, everything seems very simple, visually appealing, and snappy, and that is all very important. The camera app has also primarily stayed the same for the most part. When it came to gaming on the Nexus 6, it also performed pretty much where I expected it to. I didn't really experience any lag, and on a 6-inch display, media consumption is always going to be great. Another thing I really wanted to point out is the front-facing speakers, and a lot of manufacturers nowadays still have their speakers located on the back, Samsung being a prime example, and I really just don't understand why. The speakers don't have to sound amazing, but the fact that they are pointing to the direction you are listening to already makes it a great experience. And that is the case with these speakers. They aren't the most amazing sounding things like you would find on an HTC device, but the fact that they are pointing towards you and that they're stereo is great. One thing that I couldn't stand on previous Nexus devices was the camera, and although they weren't terrible, compared to other flagship smartphones on the market, they just didn't really compete. And this year Google has tried to change that. You've got a 13 megapixel rear-facing camera capable of recording 4K video and also dual LED ring flash. And on the front you've also got a 2 megapixel camera. So instead of talking about it, I'm just going to show you some examples of the photo and video. From taking a few photos while I was out today, I have to say that it is definitely an improvement. The photos are much sharper as you can see here and look much better than they did on the Nexus 5. However, one major thing I noticed is that it is very slow to take pictures. So when you take a picture, you might have to wait a few seconds before it processes and you could take another. The white balance in some situations also seemed to have an issue, but in broad daylight in general, it has done a good job. Low light though is a whole other story. Like the photos, the video also did a good job, but it wasn't anything that really blew me away in terms of the sharpness like I noticed on the Samsung Galaxy Note 4. But just as an everyday phone camera, it gets the job done. When it came to the battery life of the Nexus 6, I had some pretty high expectations. Not only is it running stock Android, but the fact that it has a 3220 mAh battery. But I will tell you, I didn't get the battery life I was expecting, but I wasn't disappointed either. I was able to get through just about one day in terms of the battery before I had to plug it in order to get it through the other day, but hopefully with some software updates that would be improved. Something that Google has also introduced to this year's Nexus device and Android 5.0 is the battery saver, and as you can see in the description, to help improve battery life, battery saver reduces your device's performance and limits vibration, ambient display, most background data, email messaging, and other apps, and rely on syncing may not update as many as it normally would. With Samsung's approach, they have kind of made it a new interface and giving you the vital functions by turning off the colors and everything, it allows you to maximize your battery life. But Google's approach is a little bit different. You still have your main interface, but they have tried to limit certain things, which you will definitely notice, in order to improve the battery life. Personally, I wasn't a big fan of it at all, and you can see from the animations, they pretty much took them out completely, making it perform like an Android device you had quite a few years ago. But now it's time to wrap up my thoughts of the Nexus 6, and I would have to say that in terms of the design, they have definitely nailed it, but there is still a few things that I wonder about the device. First off, I do feel the device is too large to try and appeal to the general consumer. With Google only releasing one model, I feel like it should have been around 5.5 inches, and if they did want to make a 6-inch model, they could have offered two different models. Secondly, the display wasn't exactly what I expected out of a 2560 by 1440 display. By all means, don't get me wrong, the display looks great, but it just wasn't as impressive if you compare it to something like the Samsung Galaxy Note series. And the camera, although improved, still could be better. But in terms of the positive things I have to say about the Nexus 6, the design is absolutely beautiful and the device feels great in your hand. The fact that it runs stock Android is also one of the best things about it, and also props to Motorola for having dual front-facing speakers. The device performed great and is definitely a worthy flagship for anyone out there looking to purchase a new device. But aside from that, if you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button as it helps the channel out a bunch, and leave a comment down below as to what are your thoughts of the Nexus 6, and I'll see you all in the next video.